Hello Internet, I'm Zahn and welcome to another episode of Drawing Commentary. Now, it's been a little while since the last one I did, which was for the Monster Hunter Circular. I drew one of the Frontier Elder Dragons, the Toa Tescatora. Now, that first video was a bit of an experiment as far as me doing a design start to finish in real time with active commentary while I'm recording. And that video was pretty long. It was almost 2 hours. I did everything start to finish, and I worked a little bit slower than I normally did just because I wanted to be able to talk through each step of the process. But I figured as a way to sort of keep tweaking the process along the way, I'd do another one of those videos for a different design, and hopefully this one is going to be a bit more simple, and the video itself won't be as long. So if we go ahead and take a look at our window here, I thought a little bit when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to draw, since the Toa Tescatora emblem is based on something that exists. It was based on a character from Monster Hunter. I figured as a way to sort of approach the whole commentary and drawing videos differently, I'd do something that wasn't based on something that exists already or a previous character. And I thought a good way to experiment with that would be to try and draw one of my Armada designs. Now, to explain a little bit, if you're new to the channel here or new to what I do, I have a couple different types of designs that I usually work on and post online. Probably the most prominent and popular series I work on is Monster Hunter. The Toa Tescatora circular emblem and many of the other circulars that I've posted around are a monthly thing that I put up on my DeviantArt and here on YouTube if I have a speed drawing video that goes with the design. Another series that I've done some work for off and on would be the mobile game Brave Frontier. I post a new design from my series of emblems based on the Brave Frontier characters every Friday, both on YouTube, on here, DeviantArt, and I also post them on the Brave Frontier subreddit. Another series I do some, I guess you can consider fan art for, would be Pokemon. I think the recent amount of time I've spent playing Go in the anticipation of the upcoming 3DS titles probably contributes to that a little bit. And so every once in a while, either from stream or offline, when I do one of those designs from the different creatures, I'll post one of those. Everything else that's not tied to a game or another intellectual property, I guess you can lump under original designs of things that I've come up with just either randomly or based on an idea I had. I do a lot of abstract or unusual geometric graphic designs, some that are more organic. And then another one that's something that I've been working on for a while would be the Armada series. And to sort of illustrate what that involves, I'm going to pull up some pictures from some older designs that I've done and explain a little bit about where they come from and what was the whole genesis for that project. And so here we can see one of the designs from the series. This one's called Abyss Dweller. When I started working on the Armada designs, I wanted to create a series of designs that were a bit distinct but still focused around a theme. Like the Monster Hunter ones are all creatures from the games, Brave Frontier is all the different characters from the games. Similarly, for the Armada series, the reason why it's called that is because these designs are all based on ships. I think, thinking back to where I started as far as video games goes, probably the most immediate inspiration for this series is probably top-down scrolling shooters like Galaga or Space Invaders, or even the more later generation ones like Gaiden or Ikaruga, where you have single ship scrolling upwards with an onslaught of enemies and bosses you gotta fight. That's basically where I started playing video games many years ago. And so I started up the Armada project as a way to sort of get some ideas together for these different ships. If we were to just look at kind of the variation, you can see the whole point of these designs is to have a combination of either angular sections or some of the other ones I'll try and grab are a bit more organic looking, but it's all based around the idea of a ship if you were to be looking at it from the top down, facing in this direction, facing upwards. Let me see if I can grab another one here. This design from one of the other series I've posted in the Armada emblems is called the Riser Qatar. This is still focusing around the idea of a ship, but unlike the other one you can see with had its really straight angular sections, this is a lot more curved and blade-like. This is the point of the whole series that was part of, I guess I called the Riser Squadron, I think it was called. And so usually I won't go into the Armada designs with a specific image or final product in mind. It usually starts with a basic theme or a combination of just really loose ideas that sort of coalesces into the final product along the way. And that probably sounds kind of unusual, but I think a lot of artists that are doing free drawing or basic concept work think that way when they just want to start getting a bunch of ideas together and see what comes out of the whole process. And so for the exercise today with this design, I think what I want to do is focus on creating one of the Armada designs, and I think I'm going to stick with one of the angular geometric styles. And basically the whole point of this is to verbally out loud think through my thought process as I create the design, and if you're watching this video, you'll actually get to sort of come along with me on the process of formulating whatever it is we end up with at the end. And I guess it'll sort of be like a learning experience for everyone involved, because I don't know what's going to end up on the screen here. I have a couple ideas of stuff I wanted to try, but overall I wanted to just kind of come in with a blank slate for this particular exercise and just see where it goes. Now, my setup for recording is pretty much the same as the last video I did in real-time commentary. The only real difference is I changed my mouse pad to an actual hard frictionless mouse pad. It's one of the Corsair newer models. It works pretty well and allows for really smooth movement, but it is a rough surface and sometimes you can hear my mouse moving. I think because of the way I positioned my mic in the settings, in the end it's probably going to be canceled out when I add the music to the commentary track, but if you hear kind of slight scraping in the background, that's because of my mouse, and I think it's mostly negligible. The silent mouse that I use for these recordings, the biggest thing I wanted to make sure and avoid was the audible clicking, and based on the last video I think that worked out alright. So I guess the only other thing to explain is, I guess, the focus of where I want to go with the design. But rather than try and commit to something now, as I mentioned with the whole mentality of being really flexible, I think I'm just going to jump in and then we'll sort of see what happens together as we go on this bizarre journey of drawing. So let's start here in our main window in Rhino. One thing that I usually do when I'm working on the Armada designs is I will work with the snap on sometimes when I'm setting the basic shape. The reason for that is if I want straight sections or I want to be able to connect things and have the angles be symmetrical or be in line, it's easy to do that when you're working on fixed points and increments using the snap command. Obviously, if I want to deviate from that, then I can, but it's usually a good way to start as a base. And thinking back to some of my earlier tutorials explaining the commands, especially down here with the snap functions with snap orthoplanar and osnap, which I did not realize sounds incredibly funny after the fact, but I guess it's object snap or something like that, but for the sake of comedy I'm just going to refer to it as osnap. Anyway, let's start with some basic shapes and then sort of flesh the design out from there. So for this particular ship, many of the ships that I've designed recently, some that I've posted already, some I haven't yet, have been triangular. I guess more like a delta. For example, for the most part, the ship shape is a triangle like this. I think it would be interesting to take that idea and invert it when working on this one, just to see kind of how we can play around with the shape and sort of change that. I don't want to call it a template, but that similar trend that I've been kind of working off of for a couple designs now. So the section here that I'm drawing is more of a placeholder. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this middle piece, but it's more of a place for me to work off of. I like to think of it as where the eventual core of the ship, or the main, I guess, command pod, if you will, would be. But we're going to sort of build upwards and just see what starts to form. So I've turned off the snap because I'm thinking if we're going to be building up and outwards, it's not going to be too critical to keep the sections entirely parallel, especially if we start dividing them up. So I guess to illustrate what I mean by that is I'm going to draw a divider shape here. I don't know if there's a technical term in spaceship design, but I think of them as connectors in between either parts of the body, parts of the wings, weapon systems, or whatnot, just as a way to break up the design. So if we cut out the sections and then take the original one, scale it down a little bit, and then move it back into this area, what we have here is a divider. And usually I will color code these a little bit differently just so that there's some variation and there's a transition in between whichever parts of the ship we are joining. And for the outer sections, let's add a frame. And I'll explain what that means as I'm doing it here. Much like the connector pieces, if I don't want to have that separated section out but still show that there's a piece connected, then I will use a combination of parallel curves like this, kind of like a crossbar or a frame that you'd see on a structure, so that it's joined. And one thing you'll probably see me doing periodically as I work through these, just to keep it easier to render and to ultimately get into my Photoshop template, whenever I have a section here that's completely enclosed, I usually try and divide it up so that I can cut it out easier later. Otherwise, I'm going to have to physically remove this section from the whole piece, versus cutting it out this way in advance. One, getting the lines in there, which I do like the accent lines as a way to divide up the sections, and also to make it so I don't have to cut this part out and it'll render with the whole section already sliced outwards like that. So that's something I just sort of do without thinking now. And so for moving upwards, again, sort of keeping with an upside down triangle. In fact, for the sake of the exercise, what we can do is give ourselves a really rough border, just to sort of keep the visual reminders of the shape. Obviously, if I wanted to just make it a straight triangle and then cut sections out, I could do that, but I'd rather just use it as a guide at this point, and then have the freedom to either deviate from it or follow it. And I think that'll give us more options as far as the overall design. And then ultimately, I'm going to delete this guiding frame here because it's not going to be part of the final design. It's just helping create a path, I guess you can say. And so for going upwards, I did do a design that was somewhat similar in shape, and I don't want this one to be just a copy or a real similar deviation of that one. If I can grab it here. This design which was called Magma Fangs. This one was posted probably a couple months ago. This one had the same idea of following the shape upwards and branching out. Design was kind of meant to be a bit more insect-like with these prongs and sharp edges. It almost looks like the jaws from some sort of insect creature. That was sort of the theme that I went with this one. So that's probably the only other example of something that's going from a narrow section outwards. So I'll just keep that in mind as we're working, and then try not to fall into the same exact path that will give us, a similar design, since that's not really the point of these. And so, moving upwards, I definitely want to keep the points on the outside sharp, because this one, like many of the designs that I've done, is going to be very angular, and the whole point of a lot of the pointed sections is to give the illusion, or to point out where, if this was, an actual functioning starship of sorts, you'd have sections for weapons. And so when I design these, I sort of keep that in mind. Just like the old video games, these starships out there, they would have weapons, and they'd be able to use those to fire on incoming enemies and such. So to that end, we'll continue to keep building out the main shape, following the rough upside down triangle, and then I'm going to start to sort of zero in on the details a little bit, and that's going to kind of help build out the design a little bit. And I'm sure there'll be sections that I either redraw or delete, because again, we are trying not to commit to anything as we draw, and keep it really free form. That way, whatever happens, and we don't get too hung up on the idea of keeping something just because we drew it. And so this section here, just like the ones I did previously, you're going to see throughout the course of the design, just like the Toa one that I did before, there's a lot of repeating of the same commands over and over again, and I don't want to just sort of drone on and say the same thing over and over again. So if I ever have a period of time when I'm doing these where I don't really have anything to say, then I might skip them. Not skip, but I might speed the footage up a little bit. That way I can move through the next section of the commentary and not just sit here and ramble. Not quite there yet though, so I think we're doing okay. The one thing that's pretty noticeable on a lot of these that I've done as part of the whole color variation thing is I will do what I call, I guess there would be the equivalent of highlights as I'm doing these here. So this section, these lower fins, I just use a simple angular line to break everything up, and then kind of like an accent color, I'll color these differently. That way it just sort of stands out a little bit more. For some where there's lots of sections or lots of individual smaller parts, I like to do that and then carry the theme across the different parts, just because it helps, one, break up the design, and also if you are sticking with the color scheme, it gives you the flexibility to experiment with it, and then also just make it so that the eye is not just bored, and it's more interesting to look at. I guess that's the end goal there. I don't need to try and think of something more pretentious. It's just more interesting to look at color wise, and we'll get to the whole coloring process towards the end as the whole design itself starts to come together and figure out what our theme is going to be color wise. And ultimately I'm going to have to name this thing. I probably won't do it here on the recording. I actually have a database that I add to every once in a while when I have a ship design name that I want to use, and I just file it away in this spreadsheet for use later. So I may draw from that unless something just happens to leap out at me. The Armada series, depending on if the design is part of a themed collection, I usually just try and create some sort of nonsense word combined with the theme of the actual ship. I know that doesn't mean much, but a good example would be if I want to incorporate a color name into something, I'll either combine it with some other word that explains something about the design, or I'll work the name of the color into the sort of made up name I create. It's kind of just a way that I come up with, I guess, to name these things. It's nothing complex. At some point I'm sure I'm going to run out of either combinations or variations of words, and I'm going to have to resort to things like, you know, form B or alpha form or something, which I don't want to do. I think that's not as interesting, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there, I guess. So here, as you can see, I'm just working through the different sections, and I'm basically just sort of mixing up my frame connections with the actual divider connections, just to see. Sometimes I will join multiple sections together and then go back and then change what I did if I don't like the way it looks. That's probably going to happen at least once here, depending. One thing I'm trying to do as I do more of these commentary videos is work a little bit faster, but also try and narrate through as much as what I think is relevant as possible. Obviously, if you just want to see the design, you can always skip ahead to the end of the video just to see the final product. I know people have done that on things like the TOA emblem, and that's fine. That's not going to hurt my feelings at all. I understand that listening to someone narrate a process at you for, you know, half an hour to 2 hours for that one, that's a long time. And if you just want to see the final result, go ahead and skip to the end. It's no big deal. This one, I'm going to try and keep this one under an hour, hopefully less, depending on where this thing goes. So let's actually delete this guiding triangle here. What I want to do is just see what we've come up with so far, and then I'm gonna have to think about how I want the final design to look layout wise, and I'll explain that in a bit when I get there. So right away, this thing has followed our general shape of an inverted triangle, but as I've sort of added these hooked sections going upwards, you can see it's starting to deviate from that a little bit, which is fine. We, again, don't need to strictly adhere to any sort of shape. It's mostly trying to see how it looks and if anything seems like it's conflicting. And with designs like this, that doesn't really happen a whole lot. It's one of the nice things about doing designs like this, especially if it's for something that I'm coming up with, is I have a lot of freedom to just basically do what I want, and there's no real expectation and no real pressure to have things turn out a certain way. I guess the contrast would be if I'm doing a fan art design from something like Brave Frontier or Monster Hunter or Pokemon. Obviously, if I'm doing something from a well-known series or well-known character, the design that I come up with has to be faithful to whatever that character is. Otherwise, it's not going to be recognizable, and there's no real point. The downside of that is sometimes it can be difficult depending on the piece you're working on. one of the reasons why I haven't done a commentary video for things like the Brave Frontier designs is because they are a lot more technically complex with more moving parts. And I do think that that process would be interesting, but those designs also take a really long time. I don't know if I could guarantee that a live commentary start to finish video of one of the Brave Frontier designs would be shorter than the Toa one I did for Monster Hunter. If anything, it could be potentially longer depending on how complex the original source material is, so I don't know. Could happen in the future. We'll see. Right now, I mostly want to just fiddle around with the different type of designs that I do with these commentary videos, and then just see how they turn out and see what people think. Like I mentioned in the beginning, it's really more of an experiment, a way to sort of, for myself, talk through the process, and also to let you guys that tune in every once in a while to my work get some insight into what I'm doing when I'm actually drawing these, be it offline again, or if I happen to be on Twitch, which I guess I should plug at least once when I'm doing these. I have a Twitch channel, and right now the streams have been about every other week. I will load up the program, get everything good to go, and I will just draw in Rhino and work on designs for a set amount of time. Depending on how many people stop by, I may do requests, or I may work on some further out projects just to give people sort of preview of what I'm working on. But it's basically the whole process that you see here. It's just not me narrating it and having to go a little bit slower as a result. So the design we've got so far, it's coming along, and what I think I'm gonna do is actually mirror this and just see what the total shape looks like before I go back and settle on a final design for the core. Because again, that large section I deleted out of there was mostly just a placeholder. I didn't think I was going to stick with that in the end, so. If we mirror the whole thing and take a look, right now, I think the design itself, the shape is fine. I think I'm going to build up the sides upwards a little bit more. Maybe I will go from the inside and then just put another section going up in this direction, because I feel like this has sort of lost the triangular shape we were going for in the beginning. So an easy way to just sort of add in that detail would be to just add something going up like this. This could be part of maybe the laser cannon, something like that. Just extending outwards, and that should give us a bit better shape. And what we can also do is add some sections down here that are tapering downwards and giving us that inverted triangle point that we lost a little bit, but by, I guess, building outwards more than upwards, which is, that's not a big deal. Again, I don't want to adhere super strictly to the triangle shape, but that was sort of the intent behind the design when we started, so I don't want to lose too much of that as we're going here. Let's see, I'm going to try and put a midsection in here and just see how it looks. Yeah, that's fine. I didn't want it to look too much like this upper part was really bulky, but I think that'll be fine if we just divide it up and carry the accent line through this section and this section. I think that'll be a good mix. Okay, so I think we're probably getting close to being done with the main body of this, and then once I get the core middle section, I'm going to go into the whole layout thing I mentioned a little bit earlier. So originally we had the large section down here. I think I actually want to have a narrow inner section where the core is going to be. So just something really simple, almost like a diamond with a couple extra edges. I think that's fine. This core section is going to be colored differently, so it's going to stand out, so it doesn't need any significant detail added to it. We can try and add these inner cutout sections here, but I don't think it's going to need more than that. So that's looking pretty good. I do like the overlapping sections here. I don't do this a lot, and I probably should do it more just to, again, create some variation. But it gives you the illusion of a section that's hooking underneath. Probably like some sort of fin or additional wing section that's underneath this outer protruding part. And so let's see if there's any other sections that need to be divided up. I think that's good. So let me mirror this, and then I'm going to talk about the layout. So there's two different layouts for the Armada designs, and well, actually, before I do anything else, I'm going to save this so I don't lose all my work. I will just put this in here for now, since I don't know what it's called. So there are two formats for the Armada designs. The single layer ones, where the design is just like you see here, just one layer of parts, sections, and that's the final piece. And then there's the hybrid fusion format, which is something a little bit newer that I've started experimenting with recently. And that involves two layers. Not much different, but it adds kind of a different level of detail, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So, going back to the examples, I happen to have this one up still. Abyss Dweller, that is a single layer, regular one. Regular Armada design, where everything you see here is on its own layer. Now, if I go into my archives here and look at some of the stuff that I've worked on recently, the hybrid fusion ones are dual layered. So if I pull this one up and see if we can just sort of compare them here, cut off the window a little bit. This is Verdant Spire. This one I actually posted somewhat recently, and as you can see, this is dual layered in that the darker green section, what I consider the main body of the ship, is on top, and this under part is a completely different set of shapes that's meant to be like, I guess you can consider it like an additional built-on section of the ship, sort of a combination of parts that are built onto it. It's tough to explain, I guess, in a way that doesn't sound confusing, but basically it's just a dual layer, and the point of doing this is to add to the detail and give the design more variation than just a single layer one like this. What I'll do is I'll create either a complex or simple pattern, and then I will superimpose them when I port these over to Photoshop for the final cleanup and rendering. The under sections I just call an array because it's usually an array of shapes, but also it's meant to be an additional part of the ship, and the optical illusion effect that results from that is, depending on how the sections combine, you start to get this blending of the shape sections where it's hard to tell which layer each are on, which is kind of a neat effect that was sort of unintended byproduct of doing this. And so I think for our experiment today, I think I want to do a hybrid fusion one for this, just because, one, it's a bit newer. I haven't done a lot of designs using that style, and it should be an interesting way to sort of play with the designs we have here and just see how it changes the overall feel of the image. So I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do this in real time. So let's start by creating the actual rendered surfaces that we're going to color, just to have this there, and then I'll do the array section and then color both respectively, and then I will try and put them together here in Rhino and render them. I do that combination in Photoshop normally, but I should be able to do it here just so you can see in real time what the final product looks like. And I can probably add in, after the recording, the final realized Photoshop drawing, which will include the dark stroke around it. I can't do that in Rhino. So if we take our original design and think, how are we going to add some detail that's going to enhance the design and not look too distracting? And I think what I want to do is build on the design, or the idea of the triangle. So if we go here, and I've got to be a little bit careful because I don't want my curves to get mixed up. What we can do is, actually, in fact, I'm going to do this. This will be more interesting. So I'm going to take this, keep it aligned with the axis because I don't want to screw up the symmetry. I'm going to work directly below it, and then I'm going to merge the sections together when I render it. That way we can look and see what it looks like with the sections on top of each other. And I can work with scaling or anything like that if I feel like I need to adjust the size of the different sections. So if we create our array, and again, this is going to be going underneath the sections we just made. What if we go out, and I think I want to avoid doing any crossbar type sections. Those tend to get a little bit muddled when I'm layering things versus doing these single divider sections like this. I think I want to stick with that, and I just will keep that to a minimum because again, this is going to be underneath, so I don't want to make the design too crowded, otherwise all the detail is just going to be lost when everything is sort of superimposed on top of each other. So this section, I also want to avoid making this thing too wide, otherwise it's going to lose that triangular shape that we wanted. I think I will start adding my dividers and accents up here. I think one thing we can do, now that I'm thinking about it, is add some protruding sections that go outwards. That will definitely stand out a little bit when this thing is layered, since the upper sections of the design don't have these. In fact, I think I want these parts parallel. The lower one can stick out a little bit. We'll cut this section out. And then add, I think I want to add just highlight section here. I'm not too concerned with the fact that it's not directly joined with a connector like this part is here, but I do want to clean up the angle a little bit. Not make it look like it's just jutting out at a random direction. Like I mentioned before with the use of snap versus just free form, if I'm just doing sections like this that are going to be superimposed, I can eyeball the angles and just make sure it's close. As long as it's not radically different and visually distracting, I'm not too concerned with the accuracy of the angles. Now the upper section I do want to be a bit more careful on, so if I felt like the design was going to have a lot of parts where that would be an issue, then I'd probably rely on snap a lot more. But given that's not a big deal for this one, I think we'll be okay. So if we look at the array, let's try and break up a little bit here, and then what I'm going to do is mirror this and just slide it under the one above just to see what it looks like, and then from there I'll figure out if we need to add more to this or start moving on to the coloring and get towards the end of the process here. Looking at the clock, we're just over 40 minutes, so I definitely don't want this thing to drag for too long, because at some point there's only so much more you can do with the drawing, and if you keep just adding or refining excessively, you will never finish. And that's something I've heard from other artists too when it comes to when do I stop, when is it good enough. And I'll tell you now, for most artists that work closely with their projects, the piece is never good enough. But you have to know when to step back and say, yeah, I think that looks like what I was intending. I'm happy with the results. We can call it there. Or you could say, I am not happy with how this turned out. I'm scrapping it and I'm going to start over. I'm not thinking that's really going to happen with this one, since I do like the way the upper sections turned out, but if that ever happens when I'm doing a live commentary video, I'll just have to see what makes the most sense, because I want to be true to the process, but at the same time I don't want to waste the viewers' time sitting here watching me struggle around with a design and only to just delete everything and scrap my progress. I could probably use some prudent editing to make sure that it's not just a waste of time to watch. So, for the sake of simplicity and make sure it's easier to select everything, I will join these array sections into closed curves so there's less to select. Let's mirror it, and then now we're going to slide it under the main sections above and just see what that looks like. Again, it's going to be a little bit tough to visualize. In fact, we can do it with the surfaces, that's fine. That'll be easier to look at. So I created the surfaces from the closed curves, so now if we were to move forward with this is what we'd be coloring, just like the sections we did above. And so if we slide these underneath, what we've done is essentially created an additional layer of detail underneath. Ultimately it will be underneath the original, and right now it's a bit tough to tell how that looks, but I think I actually like the overall shape. Like we originally intended, the shape is an upside down triangle if you were to go down here to the point, up, and across. And I thought it was going to be a lot more obscured than that. So that just by itself I'm happy with. So I think what we'll do is let's keep that and move on to coloring. So now we get to figure out the whole color theme and what the overall ship theme is going to be. And looking at the design, I've done a bunch of designs that I would consider ice themed, either through shape or color. I've done some fire ones. I do kind of follow the elemental scheme for these sometimes. I think I want to do something that looks aquatic, looks like a water theme. So probably a combination of blues. And maybe what we can do here, and I do have my folder of created designs on my other monitor here, so I can sort of look at what I've done so far and see which color schemes I've used so I don't just duplicate things. But let's start with a lighter color, and then I think I want to make the accents darker. So this is more of a sea foamish teal. maybe if we go a little bit more blue, a little bit lighter. What we can do, I don't normally do this until the end, but just for the sake of experimentation, we'll mess around with the rendering just so we can see the progress as we assign colors to this thing here. So right now, I think that's a pretty good base. What we'll do here as we're working is start going in and distinguishing the highlighted sections. So I'm going to probably work outside and from the outside in. So what I mean by that is all the sections that I want to create the highlights for, I'm going to start on the outside and do those first. So I'm going to just select the sections, and again I'm using Shift. Holding down Shift will allow me to select a group, and holding down Control allows me to deselect from that group. So I think those are all the sections that I want to highlight. And so we go in here, keeping with the aquatic theme, I think I want a darker blue. And we can see how that looks. I think I like that contrast. I don't think I've ever used this particular combination of colors before. And then lastly, on this part, I want to color all of the connector sections and the core. Zoom in a little bit. And I think I want these to be a green, some sort of green color. Maybe something in the middle between the kind of seafoam and dark blue. But let's see, maybe a more, not neon, I don't want this thing to be too bright. Let's see how that looks compared to the other ones. Okay, that works. And now for the array. So the array, I don't color the arrays identically with the parts that they're going underneath, because doing so would cause a lot of the detail to be lost. I do want the colors to be very similar though, so what I might do for this one, in fact, we'll do it and then just see how the colors sort of compare. Let's go with the same type of blue with other blues, but instead of going with that light seafoam color, I'm going to start with this sort of aqua-ish color. And the highlights, I'm going to go like a dark royal blue, I think. That sounds like it will definitely cause this thing to stick out. That way when it's overlaid underneath, you'll get that contrast, and hopefully it'll look like it's still keeping with that aqua theme. So let's see, I don't want this to be too dark. And then the core sections, I'm gonna make these. Let's try this light sky blue almost. So first what we'll do is we'll just render these side by side, and then I'll do the superimposing on top, and then we'll just see how that looks. Okay. So right away, that's an interesting combination of colors, but it doesn't stray too far outside the overall blue, watery color scheme that we wanted. There's not too many clashing colors as far as I can tell. I'm not a color theorist by any means. I just sort of make what looks aesthetically pleasing to my eye, and hopefully it doesn't look jarring. So let's actually get this section into place roughly, because again, I do all the final layout stuff in Photoshop after this is done. But let's just get it about where we'd want it in place, and then just see what the render looks like, the final product. Now, if you're ever trying to do this in this type of layered image in Rhino, if you try and just slide everything up on the same plane and then render it, everything's going to sort of muddle together and it's not going to look right. So just for the sake of demonstrating, this is what happens, because what we've done is we've basically rendered all these sections onto one plane, and the software just gets really confused because it just squishes everything together. So in order to get around that, we're going to go to the top view, which I don't do very often unless I have to do this, and just zoom in. I've got ortho on, and we're going to take these sections for the array, which we know are going to be below, and just move it up, which if you're looking top down is moving it behind the section here, which is the unselected top section. So it doesn't need to be that far. Now if we were to render it, of course because this thing is wider, it got cut off. So if we were to render it, now we can see the completed piece with all of its layers in its entirety. So now we can sort of fiddle around with the placement. I think I want to move the array down just a bit, so let's see what that looks like. And again, we can make all the changes now in this window and just re-render it, and it'll be fine now that we've moved them so they're not on the same plane. But it's still wide, I keep cutting it off on the right. So moving it down, the thing I'm trying to do is get these lighter sections here, these lighter blue sections, to be visible. So that didn't really help what I was trying to do. So let's try moving it just up further. A lot of times when I have to mess around with this, I will spend time in Photoshop just playing around with things and seeing what looks best for the final result. So that looks better. We're not losing a whole lot of the sections, and we do get the lighter parts underneath that sort of look like they're showing through. So I'm pretty pleased with how that turned out. Maybe move it down a little bit more. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. Now, this particular rendering here, just in the software, it doesn't have the dark line stroke around the whole thing that you'd see on, if I pull up another one of the finished ones, what I do for the Armada ones is I apply this filter that puts a stroke around everything so the sections stand out. I'm not going to do that here because I'm not in Photoshop, but the final design for this one that we've been working on will have that there, and it's going to change the way this looks. So the point of the exercise so far was to get a semi-final product that I'm happy with, and then I will do the final tweaks and finish everything up in, I guess, quote-unquote post, when I put everything into Photoshop to get the final image. And so what I will do, one, I'm going to save these separately because I'm not going to import it sandwiched like that. I'm going to render each separately and then combine everything in Photoshop. What I will do is, at the end of this, as we wrap up, I will put an image of the final rendered ship, final rendered design. Obviously, the video title will have its name once I figure out what that is, but the final product will be the last part of the video, and then that should wrap everything up. So as far as any other commentary, I think I'm pretty much done with this one. Looking at the clock here, we're just under an hour, which is not nearly as bad as the last one, but I also think this was more of an exercise in experimentation since I didn't really know what I was going to come up with by the end. So, as usual, if you have any questions or comments about the stuff that I'm working on here, or if you're trying out Rhino and want to learn a bit more about what I do, I would definitely recommend checking out the intro tutorials that I put together here on the channel as far as getting started. But by all means, if you have direct questions and want to just ask them in the comments, feel free. I have no issue just talking with people and talking about the whole design process. So until next time, I will see you guys later.